What's up, comrades? Welcome to this week's episode of Red Library, a political education podcast for today's left. We're back yet again to jam some Mammon on the Enchantments of Mammon, number 5, with our most excellent podrads from the Regrettable Century. Yours truly, Comrade Adam / Chairman Bane, is going to be running the show on this one. We're going to talk about Disney, advertising, public relations, human resources, marketing, aesthetics, beauty, and all sorts of other good stuff as per usual. This one was an incredibly fun, but also incredibly chaotic and slightly unhinged episode, so we're going to dive right into the content today. Just as a friendly reminder, we have one more big 2-part episode coming before we go on a short break for about a month or so. Me and CC Alex are going to be bringing back one of my most favorite things we do on the show, Real Late Night Philosophy Hours. Who up? This time focusing on Mari Rudy's The Singularity of Being, Lacan and the Immortal Within. Again, that's starting next week, and that will most likely be a 2-parter, 2 very long parts to end out the year. Let's run down our quick logistical housekeeping items for if you'd like to support Red Library in any number of ways if you aren't already doing so. If you'd like to support the work that we do materially, spiritually, cognitively, emotionally, head on over to Patreon. That is www.patreon.com/redlibrary. And for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all of our exclusive patron-only content. That's at least one extra patron-only episode every month. Access to the Discord server, which will then get you access to book groups, movie nights, all the wholesome discourse you crave, roundtable discussions, memes, shit posting, and just generally being part of us working out the dialectical pessimist perspective in real time. Remember to like the show on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, slide into our DMs if you're interested to maybe come on the show, maybe talk about some books you'd like us to cover. We're looking for new guests coming up for the next year. Last but not least, if you're listening on iTunes, please go down, give us one of those star reviews, maybe write us a line or two. Help more and more potential Comrade listeners all over the globe find us and the rest of the Lost Horizons network. Speaking of which, Red Library is part of the Lost Horizons podcasting network, a collection of shows focused on developing the dialectical pessimist perspective. That includes us, our podrads over at the Regrettable Century, and From 78. Remember, we have a monthly roundtable discussion with a varying cast of characters from all the shows talking about all sorts of things related to politics, philosophy, psychoanalysis, and all that other good stuff. You can find a link for that in the show notes, or just search on your favorite podcasting app. Well, here we are still, after all. Here we go, Jammin' Some Mammon, number 5. There's no outro today, and I am sorry to tell you, you're going to be assaulted auditorily by something that is not our own doing, but was sent over from our podrads of the Regrettable Century. So if you have complaints or hate mail, please send it over there, not to us. Enjoy, y'all. How do you want to describe this episode? What title do you want for it? I mean, I was just going to say Jammin' Some Mammon Part 5, but I feel like you have a special name for it.
I just think we should acknowledge that this is Mammon number 5, and that just is a catchy tune.
Yeah, Mammon number 5. It just kind of rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. A little bit of Coolidge, a little bit of Ford, a little bit of Henry Ford. It's not the best solution, but everything I spit is gold, and so I'll claim that too.
All right, fair enough. Well, I love how our psyches are fraying the deeper into this book that we go. So it's Mammon number 5, The Hot Jam by Lou Bega. I guess I'm going to be in the driver's seat on this one. What y'all think of this section? General thoughts, reactions, critiques, grievances.
Well, first thing I thought of. The first thing I came away with is that this to me just seems like you pick this whole section up, change a few of the names around, stop talking about cars and dynamos, start talking about the internet and AI, and we are living through this again, like a second version of it. So it's like techno-mammonism.
Yeah,
that was my first thought about it, and did I like it? Sure, it's a good book.
Sure, it is. It's aight.
It is a book. Good book.
It felt like a return to form from the compared to the previous section, which is
much
good.
Better.
Yeah, I think most of the criticisms I had of the previous section are absent here, and I think it's exactly. I didn't notice it as a return to form for some reason. I was just like, somehow this is better, but it is like because it's actually describing like kind of a new phenomenon, a new period, and I sort of feel like the last whole section was an extension of the previous one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which makes me worried about the next section in the book, but this one was good.
That's the one you're leading, right?
Yeah. I'm going to make it terrible.
Hell yeah. Just ruin it. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think I was really interested in this section, which for everyone that wants to know the name, is called The Heavenly City of Fordism, Enchantment in the Machine Age from 1920 to 1945. You know, before we actually dive into the notes, I will say I did take less notes or fewer notes than I normally do. I actually kind of wanted to start with a listener question that I think I shared with everyone maybe before we did section 4 right after, that I thought, since this is kind of over the halfway point of the book and it's related to some conversations Don and I have been having about potential, I would say, critiques of McCarraher's sort of framework here, but I think might be interesting to talk about in a very broad sense, and any kind of critique against some of the topics that McCarraher is going to focus on. I kind of wanted to start with that, and then we can kind of, you know, have maybe some open discussion and see where that goes, and then we'll kind of burn through the notes. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Sounds killer. Great.
All right, so I'm not going to read this word for word. So this was one of our Red Library listeners who's been following the series on Facebook. Shout out, Comrade, that sent us the question. I'm not going to dox you, but we see you. You are valid. So I'm going to read this, and maybe we can just kind of go from there. It's a little bit long, but I think it'll sort of tie together, I think, some of the things we've been starting to think through with McCarraher. So here we go. Comrade listener says, I just finished a course about 18th century philosophy with Hegel, Fichte, and Schelling. They write a lot about totality, self-conscientiousness, and the realization that I, in quotes, I, can't be defined in any other way than an activity. When comparing to Marxist theorists, they basically say the same thing about capital. It isn't something that exists independently, rather it is the process of circulation in itself. I think that perhaps this definition of capital borrows, with or without Marx paying attention to it, from the definition of the I in like German idealist philosophy and consciousness. Also worth noting is that capital seems to have a, quote, a mind of its own, unquote, and many socialist views, thereby ascribing the same misenchantment that occurred in and by capitalist thinkers to socialist thinkers as well. If that be the case, how can we develop socialist thought that isn't riddled by false enchantment of capital, and should we? So there's a lot of stuff that's going on in there, and I just want to connect the dots to something that Don and I have been discussing as well, which I think is kind of getting into these bigger philosophical assumptions in the background. I think the one that we've discussed a lot is the maybe sort of inherently individualistic nature of McCarraher's critique, and the idea that what he finds most sort of repugnant in Mammonism is this sort of encroaching upon the freedom of the individual, defined as this sort of still maybe kind of like a bourgeois atomized subject. Would you say that's fairly accurate, Don?
Yeah.
So I mean, I know these are kind of some bigger philosophical questions, but I thought it might actually be interesting at this point in the book to think through those a little bit and see what we think about those before going forward.
But what do we think of those things? Actually, so the way that question / comment from a listener ended was, I thought, like, incredibly important. Like, the short answer is yes, I think we should try to stray away from the kind of misenchantment of kind of like Chris, what is it that you called it just a little bit ago? Technocratic Mammonism.
Techno-Mammonism, I think.
Techno-Mammonism. Yeah. And the kind of like, we're not as into Oswald Spengler as it sounds like. But, he referred to the Marxism of his day as the socialism of capitalism, because of its like the way that, industrialists and, revolutionaries were equally enamored with the sort of the possibility of scientific advancements and technology, and sort of they just saw like an emancipatory wake, like every new development in capacity for production was just seen as like, that's good, period. It leads to the future. And I think we've staked out a pretty clear space arguing against that at this point. I don't really know how we kind of actually manage to fight that misenchantment, but I do think a conscious desire to do so is an important part of it.
it's also good to keep in mind that the German Socialist Party at the time that Oswald Spengler was criticizing would have been the one that said the development of monopoly capital was a good thing because it was concentrating the means of production into fewer and fewer hands, and actually like championed monopoly capital and saw it as a progressive force. So I could see why you might want to critique that from a position that like the one that he did. But yeah, that was sort of a veering off course. Sorry.
No, that's not off course. That's the course. Although maybe my comment was veering us off course because Adam's got a look on his face like, what the fuck, y'all?
I just always look like this. I have resting what the fuck face. No, I guess I do want to think about, like, even today, in let's take some strains of, like, accelerationist or even, like, speculative realist thought. You know, these kind of, like, branches of philosophy, which are, I think, still very much almost wanting to ascribe a sort of, like, agency, or, like, these social systems have, like, a quote-unquote mind of their own. Or they have this sort of ontology that is almost like this weird, monstrous kind of thing that is like you can't collapse it entirely to these social actors that make up that system in a way. And it isn't just like, it isn't just like the policies or laws or like the legal structures that support it. There's also like a way that it has this almost, this sort of like agency or ontology in the way that it operates in the world. And so I think that I guess it kind of comes down to like what is capitalism for McCarraher, you know? And because I think this is like a really deep question that is never really talked about in the book from what I know is like, like how are we defining capitalism? How are we understanding it? Do we understand it as, you know, a system that exists by a logic that isn't reducible to the actors that make up what capitalism is and how it operates day to day? You know, is that assuming this sort of German idealist kind of definition of like capital is only an activity in itself? You know, it's something that always exists as a process. You can never like freeze it into any one particular moment or any particular aspect of its functioning, like circulation versus production versus distribution, so on and so forth. So I mean I don't know. I guess I'm intrigued by the question a lot because I think it's kind of getting down into what are the basic philosophical assumptions that the entire book is structured on that maybe aren't being talked about.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. After reading, I don't know how many pages of it, but what, 2/3 of a book, 3/4 almost of a book at this point, I still don't have an answer for. It's not clear to me what McCarraher thinks of precisely that question. It might be that I just forgot. You know, maybe he explains it early on, but it's not implicit because so much of every chapter is a discussion of personalities. Mm-hmm. And their particular views and their particular impact on the dominant thinking of the era. But very little is ever said about like whatever the kind of mainspring of that new phase actually might be. It's not like the reason why we get to whatever Fordism. It's not there. So you're kind of left with something more like new ideas kind of just coming into existence, as opposed to like, you know, like you said, capital as a process, and then what the dynamic is in that process that leads from this, you know, nominal phase to this nominal phase. Like it's a history, but it doesn't illuminate a theory of history, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I also think at some earlier section of the book, I remember thinking, this is a critique of ideology, like of a specific strain of like capitalist ideology, which again is kind of like, okay, fine if it is. But I do wonder, and maybe this leads to the other question that Don and I were talking about, is the very framing around it of like we're looking at these individual figures of history and how they influence or how they played a part in this development of Mammonism. Like, is that in itself arising from the philosophical kind of underpinning about subjectivity or let's say this sort of prioritization of the individual, like in history? And I get that like McCarraher is trying to talk about this as something that, you know, obviously is occurring throughout all this, like, you know, these 4 or 5 centuries of the history that the book spans. But, you know, I do wonder is that sort of symptomatic of him, again, having this very high emphasis on like the individual and like not just like the individuals who make this history, but then the conceptualization of freedom or, liberation or being socialist or communist in response to that, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it does sort of remind me of the treatment of like the Socialist Party versus the kind of arts and crafts movement, and that there's a lot of like it's not spelled out, but there's a very obvious like preference for a kind of hyper individualized understanding of subjectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that there's no such individual element of a person's subjectivity, because I think we're all a little bit different, right? But there is not a strong suggestion that there is, well, it's not just that there's not a strong suggestion that there is a collective kind of becoming that is critical to subjectivity, but also that he seems to almost be skeptical of it, that like you pick a couple of people in the, I don't know exactly how I want to put this. He picks a couple of representatives of a kind of socialism that he disagrees with, and then they stand for the whole of the movement. But then when it comes to the one that has the other ethos, any individual kind of stands for themselves. So you have to do a little bit of excavating and I might be wrong about what he thinks, but it does appear that the way he thinks of things is in this, like I was saying, hyper individualized way.
So I've had to read recently a bunch of intellectual histories written by post-war liberal Germans, and this reads like that. All of the ideas that are presented in these works are encapsulated by a specific individual, and it's not really the effects of their ideas isn't talked about outside of just how this individual came up with them and how they changed their mind about this or that. And it's more of like the way that the world affected the individual and caused them to change his mind, rather than the individual, ideology is propagated and, how it fits along the curves and, peaks and valleys of the political topography, and helps seep into the mindset and be carried forward as like something that people glom onto. It's just like, here's the idea, here's the person, and this is the thing that caused them to come up with this idea, and then moving on. I think that he could have done a little bit better in, I don't know, maybe he couldn't have. I haven't done it yet, so maybe not.
No, I'm not saying I could have done it better, but I am saying he could have done it better.
Listen, just because I can't do something doesn't mean I don't have grounds to critique the hell out of someone else doing it.
Yes, yeah. As a reader of books, I know how they could be read.
That's done. Y'all have thoughts about these questions?
My understanding is that McCarraher is trying to say that capitalism is like a sort of like a stand-in for religion now, or like it's like a form of enchantment, right? And so I guess to me, I mean, I hear what you guys are all saying, like what to whom or like for whom, maybe is like, is he describing capitalism or it's like just this sort of like history, this sort of religious history. I guess I don't know. I just maybe I'm struggling. Could it possibly be that individualism that we're seeing is just comes as a result of not being able to describe the thing in itself, right? Like we can't talk about capitalism proper because what the fuck is it other than being able to describe it in this like certain kind of way of like how individuals relate to it. Maybe I could say you could criticize that on the level of like which individual or like what particular perspective he's engaging with in terms of appraising capital, but like it seems to me like he's trying to say it's a form of like kind of like you said at the beginning, like ideology or like a way of relating to the world that has this sort of religious quality to it. And so I wonder if maybe it's because it's descended, according to him, from like these sort of individualistic perspectives on religious commitment that it's appearing that way.
Well, that's his focus, is religious ideology and its history. So it would make sense that he sees the propagation of political ideas and the movement of the ideology of capitalism in the same way that he would see religion. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is. I feel like this is related, but it might not be. But I feel like there's like when I've been reading through this, there's I feel like, and especially with his argument that this belief in capitalism is a misenchantment. I feel like so much of the book is structured around pulling out language that people have used when people use religious language to talk about any of these, whether it's technology or science or industry. And there's always a part of me that just kind of feels like, and I think he does pull out some of the actual material and ideological changes and stuff, but I feel like so much of the argument of the book is just kind of picking out pieces of where this person used this religious language here. And I don't know, there's part of me that I almost wish, I don't know how convincing that is to me all the time. I would feel like if this is a misenchantment, this is really an enchantment, because it's possible. I mean, I don't think that a lot of them are, but it's also possible that some of these people were just being being hyperbolic or something like that, or just using flowery language. And I think he doesn't really give enough context for a lot of the quotes for me to really figure out which of those, if that's the case or not.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, so I guess I guess this comes down to I think we talked about this on one of the other episodes, but sometimes I kind of have a question of is his criticism specifically just a way of talking about capitalism, or is it an actual approach to it? And I feel like if it was an actual lived approach to it, I would have maybe preferred maybe some clearer connections between the ways that capitalism becomes a a religious practice or a ritual, or sacramental. I mean, I don't know.
I actually really I share all the sentiments you just expressed. In fact, I was thinking, reading this chapter, that I have had this thought a couple of times, but reading this section, it was reminded of it yet again, of a book. I was reminded of a book that we used to read a lot in our student socialist days, called Revolutionary Rehearsals. Chris, do you remember that book?
Yes, I do.
It's it has a thesis about how, what the basic argument is. Revolts are going to happen because they're just a natural part of life under an unstable system. And so, but they come and go, and you can't have a spontaneous approach, because if you don't have a party, you can't lead and you can't win, and so on. Right. So that's the thesis. And then every chapter is just a series of a sketch of a historical event to remind you of the thesis. And as you read it, you start, let's say you're convinced immediately, then the only other reason you're reading it is for anecdotal evidence that it might be the case elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Because there's not a deeper link that's drawn between, in this case, the expressed sentiments of individual, proponents of a particular variant of capitalistic ideology, and the way in which it is religious in tone. And on the question, do they always mean it the way that it's being interpreted, is good, I think, is a good question, because if you go back to the discussion about Eugene Debs, he constantly spoke in religious language, and was an avowed atheist. He just found it moving and stirring. But you could write this book and say, yeah, look at Eugene Debs talking about the promised land and so on, and that's also a, mystification of the world. If you talk to Debs about, God, he would say, oh, there isn't one. So if you agree with this thesis for this book, then each of these anecdotal bits kind of do help, they draw an extra line underneath the thing that you agree with. But if you don't, it stops being convincing, in page after page. Like you said, it's just, here's a way of speaking that can be interpreted a lot of ways. Although, I will say that this part 5, he's done a better job of it than in the part 4.
It's like he picked his thread back up.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think that chapter 4 or part 4 was a little bit of a departure from the subject matter. Even it was kind of trying to illustrate, look, it wasn't just the capitalist class and the industrial magnates and whatever else, and that succumbed to this. It was also everyone else, just to illustrate how thoroughly saturated from top to bottom American society is with this, mammonism. Mm-hmm. And I think that he tried a little bit too hard to make those threads connect in some instances. And I think he's back in form in this section.
Just kind of based on that, Chris, I'm wondering, as we get ready to dive into the section, do y'all think that there's also a way that McCarraher is trying to show through this depiction of the saturation throughout all these different layers of society or different aspects of different industries and stuff. Do you feel like there's an element of kind of like the dominant ideology hypothesis here from Marx, that essentially the ideas of the ruling class are the ideas of essentially the rest of society? Do you think that's also kind of part of the implication in this?
I mean, yeah, I would say that's what I picked up from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I would even say that I agree with them.
Yeah.
Like I agree with the general thrust of what's in the book. And even to some extent, the way he, in the previous sections, he makes an attempt to show how deeply steeped in ideology everybody is, even as we oppose it, or even as we oppose the system which generates it and is propped up by it. And that is actually something that is of considerable interest to me, in the sense of like mostly informed by like kind of 60s and post 60s discussions about, you know, ideology and spectacle and so on. But like, you know, I hadn't, prior to reading this, I hadn't really thought of just how much that might have always been the case. And so that maybe this not a particular, maybe we don't live in a very special era. Maybe this is just mature capitalism just does this. And we're all kind of infected by it, even in resistance to it. Something like that.
Alex, do you have anything else you want to throw in?
Not at the moment.
Eat your fucking pizza, Alex.
So, I mean, to go back to, like, I think his, like us being unclear of exactly what his definition of capitalism is. And I think that I mentioned this question on another episode, but I think it was at the end, and it had been very long, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about it very much. But, I mean, what's the sense that you all get of, like, I guess I don't see a reason why communism would also not be, like, fall to the misenchantment that we see here. Like, for McCarraher, and especially in light of the last section, in light of part 4 when we read, I don't know, like, it seems like unless, I feel like you would not only have to adopt some form of leftism, but you have to adopt, like, specifically a very Christian form of leftism in order to avoid this sort of misenchantment. And I don't know, like, I do feel like it leaves, or could leave, readers in sort of a weird place if they maybe are religious in a different way or not religious at all if you are a reader on the left. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys get that same sense, or if you guys actually do think that there's like a clear way of not misenchanting something like a communist revolution or communism.
I think that McCarraher would advocate that you take a Christian view and enact some sort of Christian libertarian leftism. And I see where you're coming from. Like, after reading that last section, and I was thinking, well, how the hell, if everyone is thoroughly misenchanted, like if Eugene Debs has this misenchanted worldview, if every single leftist in American history has this misenchanted worldview, then how any of us fare when held up to McCarraher's scrutiny? And I would say that we would all probably be critiqued in the same fashion. And I know specifically, like, those of us who kind of adopt a sort of techno-futurist view, techno-determinist. How about that? Technological determinist view, like a lot of Marxists do these days, be like on the very far end of misenchanted worldview, and then the rest of us who kind of are sitting over here in these muddy, romantic, backward-looking, simultaneously forward-looking kind of Marxist worldview might not be as misenchanted so much. But I think that there's no way to be a Marxist in any sense of the term and not be critiqued by McCarraher as having a misenchanted worldview, because he thinks Marx has a misenchanted worldview. Yeah,
it's like built in, right, and like baked into the very edifice of like Marx's critique.
And honestly, I think that that's probably an okay thing to think. It doesn't mean that Marx is wrong, because one of the things that McCarraher also says is like, there's no way to re-enchant the world. It's a futile project. The best thing that we can do is look at the misenchantment and try to critique it and move move forward in our the way that we do things, knowing fully that our worldview is misenchanted. And I think that I could live with that.
I think I would disagree with the notion that you can't re-enchant the world. Or rather, I guess what I would say is maybe we could take a step in that direction by not trying to disenchant the world, right? That like the conscious adoption of the notion that what the Enlightenment Project means is that everything can eventually and will ultimately be rationalized, ordered, quantified, and explained away. Like if that's your starting premise for engagement with the world, then it does appear as though the misenchantment that comes with that attempt to disenchant it kind of flows from it. So maybe if we just don't, and maybe if we don't see the role of science as doing that, and maybe if we don't see a problem with like faith or belief or whatever it might be, or like maybe if we just stop trying to eradicate the inexplicable and we just instead utilize what we can, try to understand everything, right? But utilize what we can understand to just make the world better. But that it doesn't necessarily for us mean the eventual complete comprehension of all things, then at least we won't be doing the job of disenchanting by trying to rationally order things which can't be, or doing so in a way which is just as mystifying. Yeah, maybe it's the conscious project that is the problem. Like, if you ever read an essay by Lenin called The Attitude of the Workers' Party Toward Religion, where he argues really strongly against allowing members of the Communist Party to openly profess a religious faith because of how important it is to like project a rationalist, atheistic worldview, and that the communist discourse is one which is inherently that. That seems to me to be like not just unnecessary, but seems like bad too.
Well, that actually brings up, going back to the listener question, what I was wondering about. I mean, is kind of what we're trying to get at here an adoption of some sort of like quote unquote leftist like political project or political worldview without it unconsciously being misenchanted in the same way that capitalist ideology in the way that McCarraher is describing is misenchanted? Because that's my read of his critique of like Debs and a lot of like second international socialism or whatever, is that it's not aware that it is adopting, or it is very uncritically adopting, the same misenchantment from the structure and logic of capital itself, and then basically imbuing that into what it thinks is going to be the thing to challenge it most directly. And I mean, I could almost see that like what we're saying is that, well, you can't individually try to re-enchant the world, because that basically...
I might have been misrepresenting what he said earlier.
Yeah, this is the thought police. I'm here to arrest everyone and send you to thought jail for all your bourgeois reactionary views. No, but I thought he was saying that it was yeah, the thought gulag. But I thought he said that it was in the individualistic re-enchantment of the world that eventually leads to this sort of almost just like a, you know, some sort of just hyper narcissistic. I don't think he would have said this, but like hyper narcissistic kind of just like failed, sort of individualized way of trying to deal with this misenchantment. But I mean, maybe this comes back to the thing about, you know, the individual versus the collective focus. I mean, is it possible that in a sort of like Christian or sort of like Catholic kind of socialist, or, I mean, however we want to describe his politics, right? If there is a communal way to do it, is that possible to re-enchant the world? Because I think the distinguishing thing here is we're trying to talk about, is it trying to sort of just relate yourself to the sort of conditions of disenchantment or misenchantment or whatever it might be. It's kind of like, you know, once that is out of the box, there's no putting it back, right? We can't just nostalgically return back to this like period in the past where things were quote unquote like enchanted in a different way. Is it like we're just trying to relate to the misenchantment, or is it that we're trying to say that no, you can re-enchant the world, but it has to be done in this collective and maybe even religious way for McCarraher?
It's not clear to me what it means.
That's a good question.
I was going to say, should we just wait till we get to the end of the book?
Well, it just mean like thus far, five out of 7 parts in, it's not clear to me what McCarraher thinks.
Yeah.
Of this question. And we could add that to the list of, which might even be an extensive list at this point, of criticisms, because it is part of the subject that it's not really grappled with. And it's a huge fucking question. I can understand not really knowing how to grapple with it. But it does seem like, maybe hopefully toward the end of the book, he will expound on it a little, even if only to ask the question, because he also just hasn't really, unless again, like it's just another thing I've forgotten about. But I would say for me personally, that a conscious rejection of this bourgeois scientific notion of conquering nature and rationally ordering everything could take us pretty far. Like if we recenter the project in the emancipation of humanity, and then technological developments and political strategies and planning and whatever else, administration is all just subordinated to the somewhat ethereal notion of freedom, then maybe we can re-enchant the world. If the project is this ethereal thing, if this somewhat intangible, never quite fully reached place to get to, which is, some horizon of freedom, instead of technological proficiency and efficiency. Like, I have friends and comrades who will rail against capitalist society as being, on the basis primarily of its inefficiencies. And like, they're not wrong, but that's not really what about it gets to me, It's more about the fact that it makes everybody feel terrible all the time because their lives are bad.
Because everything is terrible.
Yeah. Right. So if we stop making everything terrible, we might democratically administer collectively a somewhat not very rational society. But if it feels okay, and that's better.
I guess the one thing I would say, maybe as like a kind of critical response to that though, is I do think that for a lot of people I know who probably are very either non-critical or just don't, they kind of adopt capitalist social relations and production wholesale, I think a lot of them do think that like it is pushing us towards like the liberation of humanity, right? And I don't even know how many of them would describe it as just about like how efficient things are. I mean, I do think there is a strain of like modern capitalist ideology, which increasingly I think is not only saying, oh, like the more we develop or like, structure capital in a way or like give you certain commodities, like this is freedom, right? I think a lot of this hinges on how do you define what freedom is. And I think that there's an increasing way that like let's say the environmental impacts, like the just destructive externalities of capital to some degree, I think are being recognized, if not by fucking, like Bezos and shit, but like by a lot of people that I think, we probably know in our day-to-day lives. I think in some way, like they do see this as the thing that's bringing about the liberation of humanity. I think the thing it always hinges on though is like, but what do we mean by liberation? And I don't necessarily think that for a lot of the people I know, they would define that as being about efficiency in a way. I don't know. I'm not even really sure how they would define it. I kind of probably going to start asking everyone that question and being horribly insufferable about it now.
Freedom from the problem of freedom, right? Like if we envision machines to be a perfect embodiment of freedom, then we won't worry about freedom anymore. We'll just do our jobs perfectly efficiently. And that's the ultimate project of capitalism, right? Like that's what it's really doing.
And it's also the ultimate project of the fully automated luxury communist vision for the future, which is that, we can utilize all of this to be more comfortable and have more free time if we eliminate the profit motive. For me, more free time and more comfort are nice possible bonuses for that might come from the elimination of the profit motive, the exploitation of wage labor, and the notion of class. But if in order to achieve those things, we have to, my favorite example is if you live in London and you want sushi, you don't get to have sushi from fish that they catch off the coast of Japan because it's insane. There's no technical proficiency that we can arrive at that will make that possible. You might just have to not eat bananas in Detroit in the winter. And but if you actually are genuinely free in the sense of you're not compelled to sell your labor in order to, stay alive, and that you have an obligation to society to participate, and that's it, then it might be okay if we don't have Netflix anymore. Or sometimes you have to dig a hole with a shovel still. So to me, it's not that these things aren't related. It's that the relationship is inverted, or rather it should be, at least in our conceptions.
In my mind, the person, the new man, the novus homos created by the fully automated luxury communism society is 14-year-old Fortnite gamer, but that's everyone.
Just everyone flossing all the time. Everyone doing those dances.
You're completely plugged in to mindless entertainment and constantly 24/7, and you're molded by it and immersed in it. And the only way that you can relate to other people is through the images that are flashed before your eyes. So that's what you are. And that seems to me like the most likely outcome of the fully automated luxury communist society.
Are you saying if we have full communism, we can't play Fortnite and we can't use Zoom to do podcasting? Because y'all are just images flashing in front of my face right now.
No, I just think
make no mistake, this is hell.
None of us want to be doing this podcast right now. It's just images flashing on the cave wall. There's a fire behind me. This is Plato's cave.
In a better world, we'd be hanging out making this podcast.
That's true.
Right.
We'd be miserable in person.
I tend to agree with what Jason was saying. Like, I think that's actually really interesting that, like, if things just were, like, slightly different, we wouldn't really have that much issue with, like, having to work 40-hour work weeks and, like, the stresses of, like, raising families and all these things that are, like, problematic in capitalism, but rather it would be, like, things we'd be willing to put up with if we just knew that the forces of economics were serving us in some minimalistic way, and just at least at all.
Shit. 20-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Well, like, and, think about the way in which there's this imagined future which is so technologically proficient that it is also sustainable. Because, now you're mining asteroids instead of, whatever, a mountain
made of gold.
And what I wonder about is, like, how is it even possible that we could imagine a future where, with most things being automated and most commodities just being available in abundance at all times, that we wouldn't actually dramatically increase the alienation of man from nature by virtue of the fact that you don't even encounter it as a potential resource to be preserved or exploited. It's just things are here because you need them, and nature is over there, and you might go to visit it or whatever, but there's no relationship between those things and nature anymore because labor is absent. And so too is the laborer and the relationship of the laborer to the process of extraction and the production and creation of commodities out of raw materials. Seems to me that it's like, it's a fairly soulless vision of the future. And I don't see how it could be otherwise, because what it does is it abstracts our conceptions of the world purely to the realm of ideas. When it's our environmentalism comes from an engagement with the natural world as we're destroying it. And so we develop the notion of, we should protect and preserve this. But if you're not engaging with it, then what's the material basis for the idea that it should be protected and preserved?
Twitter clout.
That's right. Anyways, none of this is in the book.
It's peripherally related, though. I mean, like...
That's true.
Mammonism is what we're talking about, and its younger brother exists in this Falk idea.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It is the fully automated luxury communist variant of techno-futurism is still completely in thrall to this ideology of efficiency and production that is capitalist to the core.
Well, maybe
Fuck Falk. All my homies hate Falk.
Yeah. Friendship ended with Falk.
Some of my homies don't hate Falk, but they're just wrong.
I think on a broader level, I mean, in some way, isn't this like what I think both of our shows tend to do, right? Which is to try to critically, pull out some daggers and say, what are the things about the structures and processes of capital that we're adopting, even as we think we're critiquing it most vehemently and opposing it most strongly. I think that's a common theme on both of our shows. You all talk about that with recuperation. I think we talk a lot about it with, things related to like philosophy and how sort of we think about subjectivity. That's the reason why we engage with psychoanalysis in the way that we do, I think. So, I do think there is, in the background, there's a shared philosophical commitment, I guess, or a project, which is to say, how have we sort of inculcated ourselves or been inculcated with the very thing that we think we're opposing, and I think we have to take that really seriously if we ever want to have any kind of vision that doesn't just, reinforce the very assumptions and conditions of the very thing that we think we're opposing.
Yeah. Yeah, word.
Indeed.
Do y'all want to touch on anything else, or do you want to burn through these notes and do some justice to Mammon number 5? How y'all
Let's
feeling?
blaze those notes.
All right.
Blaze them up.
Just blaze it. 420, just blaze it. All right. So, all right, I'm going to be in the, I'm going to be in the monarch's chair instead of the
Throne.
driver's seat. Yeah, throne.
Yeah.
What's it called? The king chair?
I hate
Sorry,
you all. I hate you all. I was like, I hate these motherfuckers. Let's start a podcasting network together. All right, here we go. So the Heavenly City of Fordism, Enchantment of the Machine Age, 1920 through 1945. So a couple of notes just on the general overview of the section, which I don't know if we mentioned that, but McCarraher always does like a general overview of each section before he dives into the chapters. But sort of some common themes in part 5. So I think we saw this in the last section as well, but the factory and mass production increasingly shift into the role as, I think he calls it the new holiest of holies, with wage workers being worshippers at its altar. So again, got that McCarraher spice on it.
It's more like the other thing that you can be on the altar, which is the object of sacrifice.
Yeah, big oof. So people like Henry Ford start to see the assembly line itself as the body of the Savior that eclipsed the power and role of Christendom's vision of the body of Christ.
Makes you want to eat sand.
So mass production itself becomes the vehicle of redemption in Mammonist enchantment. And he kind of mentions a photographer named Charles Sheeler, who was basically walking around the Ford factory and taking pictures of everything. And I guess there's some language in there about how it was directly related to the Bible and like Bible passages. And so he would like put a picture up of industrial architecture and then would have some sort of, I think, it was like some saying from the actual Bible, right? Like some passage. But industrial architecture, my fucking brain is just destroyed. It's all them drugs. Industrial architecture is imbued with spiritual meaning. Don, did you have a quote? I thought you were looking at something.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I can read.
You know, like generally, I
if you want.
don't think the Holy Office of the Inquisition is a good idea. But like, whenever I read this stuff, I'm like, these people need to be tortured.
Listen,
these heretics need to be fucking chastised.
listen. We say take torture away from the CIA and give it to us.
We disagree with the Extraordinary Rendition Program, but we need one of our own.
It's fine if it's ours.
It was done incorrectly the first time.
Yeah, it's so the conversation we started off having about the way that both in terms of let's say our opponent and also our opposition, that in both cases it's all steeped in a particular ideology. I feel like the intro to this section does a really good job of illustrating it by he takes Calvin Coolidge, Henry Ford, and then Eugene O'Neill as three people who express this kind of the notion of machinery as the new Messiah, the divine image on earth. Because like Eugene O'Neill is a poet primarily. He's not really known for being one of ours, but he is one. In the loosest sense, he was a fellow traveler. He was a part of the whole Greenwich Village bohemian variant of the kind of socialist party in its white collar sections. Anyways,
He was a radical. He was a lib always, though, right?
I mean, maybe that's the problem. Yeah, but like Eugene O'Neill is somebody who he dedicates his life to feeling, and yet even he's like enamored with the most unfeeling thing that there is, which is fucking factory production.
Ideology, dog.
Ideology is a hell of a drug.
It sure is. So I guess I know this has been a thing in the other sections as well, but McCarraher tends to sort of counterpose someone who is engaged in, let's say, sort of the arts or in management or whatever, who, might be participating in like Mammonism, but also was very aware of its sort of more destructive qualities or was critical of it in a way. So counterposed to Charles Sheeler, he talks briefly about a photographer named Paul Strand, who saw the potential for the industrial body of the Savior. Again, it is the Savior. It's still being interpreted that way, but also it was seen as potentially the thing that was going to dehumanize all of us. It's a good thing that didn't come to pass.
Yeah, dodged a bullet there.
Yeah, really missed the blade of the executioner, just barely. So he also mentions John Dewey, who saw the need for a new psychological and moral type of character to meet the demands of quote-unquote corporateness. And for Dewey, this would involve a moral imagination as well as a technological reason that entailed a common faith and allegiance to ideal ends that arose in the rituals, temples, and codes of mass production. So going back to your point a little bit earlier, Don, I mean, did you see in this section some at least fleshing out or at least a hinting at, you know, it isn't just like the ideas or the language that people use, but seeing like mass production itself as a collection of rituals?
I do want to be clear that like I do find the book pretty convincing. I just feel like I said, I just think that there's some sections that seems like he is really just highlighting just language and less about, you know, activities and other type of basically any other way that you can interpret religious practice. So I mean, I think that this section and some of the parts in this section I thought were a little bit better fleshed out than some of the others. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, like that question was not necessarily saying that I wasn't convinced by the book at all. I just feel like I said, I would have preferred maybe for the emphasis to be on the other. Yeah. Like I feel like his emphasis throughout the whole book seems to be more on the language. And I would have probably was hoping that maybe it would have been the other way around.
Yeah. I think I'm just so used to you disagreeing with everything. I just assumed that was you just disagreeing with McCarraher.
Don is just always mad and he doesn't like anything. So.
And that's why we love him.
Actually, I feel like what I've learned about Don is that this is precisely the way that Don agrees with things. It's like, yeah, it's not convincing. It's not very good. I mean, I agree with it. I like it, but I don't really like it, you know?
Honestly, the rest of us are suckers for actually liking things. Like,
yeah.
That's true.
Don has really transcended all of this shit and really exists in a higher ethereal plane.
We're still in first gear pessimism here. Don has transcended the need for liking things.
Yeah, liking things is pretty cringe, and we're all a bunch of simps for doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
I do like
fucking
this book.
meme
I
talk.
do like this book.
Yeah.
Meme.
That's for Kevin. Rest in peace.
Yeah, I was going to say a whole lot of meme talk going on right now. I like it. R.I.P. Kevin. R.I.P. Mir.
On the subject of being completely enthralled to the ideology of our time, even as we oppose it. Like, I actually fucking hate the internet and internet culture. But obviously I don't, right? Like, I think I do, but I fostered a cat and named him Meatwad.
Whomst among us.
Listen, at the end of the day, all of us are victims of our time and place.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we're trying to make history, but not in the conditions of our own choosing, I guess.
That's right.
I would not have chosen this shit.
That's the last thing I ever would have chose to make history in. All right. So I have to tell you, the thing that I really enjoyed about this section is I actually found this to be one of the more like conceptual sections in the book, where I felt like he was actually trying to develop at least some, I don't know if I want to say like theory, but it did strike me as like not just a series of sort of like facts or kind of, I don't want to say anecdotal history because that's like not giving him enough credit. But the thing I really liked about this is the discussion about Fordism in this particular like 25-year period, and the way he describes Fordism as being a political economic mode of production and also a state formation. And so there's this other thing that we're going to come back to, and maybe this helps us think about like what is he focusing on or what is his point of critique in this book. And it has to do with Fordism as a moral economy. So this is page 364. He says, as a moral economy, Fordism complemented a new producer culture suited to mechanized production with a full-fledged quote-unquote consumer culture. So that just very brief quote, I thought, to me, struck me as something that really, I think, conceptually gave a lot more of a framework to this, not as just like, it's like Mammonism, which, you know, again, I like that. But also the idea of saying that this is talking about a state formation, a political economic order, and then this sort of other moral economy that's also propping all this up. I just thought it was a little bit more conceptually rich and helped me think about the rest of the chapters in a way that I don't really think you got in the previous sections from what I remember.
So this is where I'll actually not put this as a mark against McCarraher's methodology here. I actually think it might be that there's a historical material reason for this section being a better encapsulation of, or more, I'd say, a more theoretical approach to the question. Because it seems to me like similar to how the development of capitalism is this long process, and you can identify it in a couple of ways throughout the whole, the age of exploration into the early modern period, before ever there's such a thing as industrialization, where capitalism becomes full-fledged. The misenchantment of capitalist ideology as a fully fledged phenomenon might actually only come into existence in the period where the state and corporate power are merging, so that like everything we've dealt with in history up to this point in the book is the prehistory of this moment, where Mammonism is not fully developed. It hasn't yet prevailed. It's only something that's present in, and obviously, I think I could challenge my own argument there by just looking at like what we call the Protestant work ethic and the direct relationship between the two. But I think the difference here is that because of mass media, mass culture, state and capital fusion, and all of these things being conscious, that there is now, unlike in all the previous iterations of the discussion, it now is a well-developed theoretical ideological project, and is recognized as such by its architects.
Oh, hey, I don't know if you guys knew this yet, but I had a professor tell me the Protestant work ethic theory is not right. He said it's been debunked. So, oh well.
Oh, good. So,
yeah.
Good to know.
Bummer.
It's debunked on Nation.
But like, like it's not in this chapter. No, sorry, it's not in this introduction. It's in I think it's in chapter 16. But he points to the similarities between the kind of corporate liberalism in some countries and, fascist corporatism in other countries, to kind of illustrate like a world historic shift in relations of production, even though they're still just as capitalist as they were when Marx was writing Capital, that there's a political edge that's much more conscious. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily like good history, but I can see why it can be more clearly argued in this period in history.
Jason, would you say it's like maybe fair to say that before this point, the religion of Mammonism is basically like a breakaway denomination or sect of a religion, and this is when it fully becomes fully formed as its own religious like worldview or project?
That's actually a really great way of putting it. That basically makes the argument I wanted to make, but more clearly and with far fewer words.
Okay.
Devil horns in the air for that synthesizing of the argument.
Yeah.
Don gets a damn shorty. Okay.
Not for me though. No one will ever get that from me.
Living up to his name is the Commissar of Degeneracy right there. You just morally ruined me for the rest of this series we're gonna do on this book with that comment. All right, it's meme speak tonight on jamming some Mammon number 5. All right, I'm gonna keep going, you fucking degenerates. So we're talking here now about a moral economy that has both a producer and a consumer culture. So that might be part of what y'all are getting at with the way that it gets synthesized into sort of like the architects are very consciously engaging in this project in a way that, encapsulates both production and consumption. And he also says this is essentially what Dewey's common faith was, that he said we needed to basically to create a sort of like moral character with a technological rigor that can meet the demands of corporateness. Okay, so that's the intro. So let's go ahead and move into chapter 16. So this chapter is called Business is the Soul of America, the New Capitalism, and the Business Millennium. So around this time, a lot of employers are creating company unions, workers' councils, shop committees, and pensions, the same way we've talked about those as being reactions against the uprising of organized labor and challenges to capital, and basically these are concessions to try to basically diffuse class conflict. But McCarraher says that a lot of these actually left the majority of workers untouched. He says that proprietary fundamentalism was sweeping the country as proprietary gospel loses steam. So this is on page, let me see what page I'm on, 367. So I think the main example he gives of what exactly this proprietary fundamentalism was that sort of has this resurgence is it's called the American Plan. And so the American Plan was essentially, calls it a crusade to rid industrial workplaces of unions and union agitation, but it was also a response to the Bolshevik Revolution, creating fear in the business community and was, actually radicalizing workers. So he basically, I think, just says that, as a reaction to this, that this proprietary fundamentalism was seen as a way to combat, again, like kind of insurgent class conflict and the, I guess, like global sort of impact of the Bolshevik Revolution on workers all over the world.
Yeah, so that actually is part of the long-winded and somewhat ham-fisted argument I was trying to make that Don encapsulated better, is that I think that you have a more system-wide ideological edge to the further development of, let's say the adoption of Mammonism, like in a sort of Constantine as the emperor kind of way now. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the Russian Revolution, the collapse of all the empires in Europe, the 1919. He mentions it in the very first line, right? The upsurge of strikes in 1919, but that doesn't even really get. I don't think it quite fully gets at like the significance of the threat in 1919. Of, there weren't just strikes. There's a general strike in Seattle. There's a strike of the entire steel industry. They're like. It's the closest that the country has gotten up to that point to a Paris Commune type moment. And the business classes talk about it as such. Like Bolshevism's coming here.
Yeah.
So like, this next, all the stuff about company unions. So even as they're trying to destroy industrial organizations in labor, they are actually trying to fill the gap with something that feels good for people so that they don't get won over to, red propaganda.
Yeah.
And so, you can't just crack the skulls of strikers now that they have a positive thing that they can point to and say, oh, we're trying to do that. So now you have to give them a false image of it. And I think that's Debord said that the spectacle was born the moment that, the workers' movement had to be presented with a false image of its own power in order to keep it from taking power. And this is that kind of period he's talking about.
Yeah, I was just going to tag on here, too. He says that business people felt the need to reassert the faith that stood threatened by enemies within and without. And this is Merle Thorpe, editor of the Nation's Business. He says, business is the soul of America. Also, this is a little bit...
He's not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong at all, yeah.
It's a country with... It's an angel with a filthy soul.
That's why America is going to hell.
Yeah. Destroy
That's
America.
That's why on this podcast we say fuck America. Oh no, we say death to America.
Yeah, death to America.
I did it wrong.
Fuck to America.
This is why on this podcast we say.
I'm just going to tag one other quote here. This is a little bit down. So this is from the presidential address to the National Association of Manufacturers. John E. Edgerton declared that the great ruler of the universe had decreed the bylaws of business and the hierarchy of classes.
Business.
The Bylaws of Business is my next album.
Hell yeah. Dropping December 20th. I don't know.
Because in my mind, because I'm old now, so in my mind, all hip hop and rap is just from 2003.
Who was even around in 2003?
Wasn't that like weird Fred Durst, like rap rock at 2000?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking of like fucking Juvenile and the Cash Money Millionaires and Baby Beesh, you know?
Fucking...
That's not what hip hop is now. Yeah.
West Side Connection.
Fucking shit.
Evacuate the building. Here come the plane. It's the big bad West Side Connects gang.
It's a very musical episode tonight. Don hates it. Yeah. Because Don hates music.
Like a sociopath?
Yeah, yes.
Just like that.
Correct.
No, he's transcended the musical plane. You see, he's above. Sorry.
Oh, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to describe a meme.
It sure is.
Do it for Kevin.
R.I.P. Kev.
Rest in peace, Kevin.
I just saw it the other day, so I might butcher it a little bit, but it doesn't matter. It's the ideal form that I'm grasping at here. Because there's it's a picture of this guy, and he's like, got this disgusted look on his face. And it's like, what, you listen to music that's so lame and so mainstream? I only listen to the sounds of birds. They can't sell out.
Hell yeah.
That's done.
That puts us in a really tough position, though, because we don't believe
Birds
in
don't
birds.
exist.
Yeah,
No,
we
birds
think,
are not real.
yeah.
Oh, fucking forgot that birds are fake.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how we're gonna parse this.
Yeah, definitely not listening to birds.
Oh, hell yeah, cabby hole.
That just means that Don is actually the most recuperated of all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Ooh, snap.
Isn't it also like in the Amazon, like those birds that like famously recreate the sounds of like all the machines that are cutting the trees down?
It's one of
Like,
the
they're
saddest fucking things of all time.
They're like no longer making bird sounds, but now they're just making like machine noise.
They just sound like an industrial band.
Like chainsaw.
Unironically support arming the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, by the way.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's an official.
Also unironically.
Yeah, Lost Horizons line. Yeah. What were you gonna say, Don?
Totally.
I said I also support that.
Oh, I thought you were just gonna say just arm everybody.
Well, yeah.
Well, not everybody.
Not everybody.
I'm for
that's a little
de-arming everyone, but like their actual arms, like just de-arm everyone.
Mm.
No, I get it. I don't think you have to explain it.
Also deworming. That's good too.
All
If you
right.
just de-arm everybody from 2 arms, then the octopus and squid will rule the world.
And that's how it should be. The
Yeah,
cephalopod is superior to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Still looking for
Our
that.
revolutionary vanguard is the old gods. That's right.
Yeah, Adam, you got anarchy on your hands right now, man.
Yeah, I don't care. The world is on fire and I'm tired. I don't care. All right, chapter 16. We're moving on. So there was some recognition that the Eden of free enterprise was a fantasy, that so many business leaders began camouflaging new material realities in the quote-unquote symbolic language of ritual. So he talks a little bit about Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt and reactions to Lewis's critique of capital and proprietary fundamentalism. And there was this talk about recuperation. There was an increasing call by supporters of capitalism in the business community to quote unquote dare to be a Babbitt. So I don't know if y'all want to like talk about exactly what Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt was all about, but basically don't dare to be a Babbitt was essentially like dare to be a filthy, soulless capitalist.
Yeah, Babbitt and his friends blend Christianity and Rotarian twaddle, extolling the evangelist Mike Monday, a painfully obvious reference to Billy Sunday, for keeping the overhead of spiritual regeneration down to an unprecedented rock bottom basis.
It's kind of like all of those like fucking business mindset success win Instagrams that take these stills from like the Wolf of Wall Street and then put an inspirational quote about how you got to hustle, or like images of the dudes from what's the
Peaky Blinders.
Peaky Blinders, yeah. And it's like, you know, only the type of people you associate with, the type of people you're going to be. And it's like this fucking photo of these guys who are just go around murdering people.
You know, it's funny. This
It's like, yeah, this is a crime family. They're like, you know, they're awesome, sure, but like, I don't know if that's about what you think it's about.
Yeah. You know, this reminds me of a Facebook page called Joker's Lover, where essentially it's just people who take images of Joker and just put like business success win hashtag passion economy quotes over pictures of the Joker to inspire you daily. Highly recommend everyone check it out. Joker's
page.
Lover on Facebook.com.
That one's also for Kevin.
Also for Kevin. I just basically, I'm trying to drive Don out of his mind by sending him memes from this page.
He's doing a good job of it.
I'm very close to succeeding. My goal is by the end of the year, I want Don to completely lose his mind.
That way he can join our Atlantis podcast.
Yeah, that's the barrier to entry.
That's a barrier to entry?
Well, Alex, that's why you're on it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense then. I was like, why are you inviting me to things? I don't know anything.
It's because you're out of your mind.
Of all the things he's lost, he
Well,
misses his mind
I'm
the
in.
most.
Yeah. Definitely not actually going to do an Atlantis podcast.
Nope.
Just to be very clear. To
Not on
anybody
this fucking network. Get out of here.
No. Weak.
That's some weak shit.
Yeah.
All right, so
I'm still in.
So Babbitt did not include the ways that business leaders were scrambling to find new ways of life as the Protestant culture he was indebted to was dying out. So I guess like what McCarraher is getting at is that even though, you know, this figure of Babbitt might have seemingly kind of wholeheartedly kind of identified or sort of championed Mammonism, that there was also an increasing crisis, an ideological crisis that was happening about, thinking about leading up to the Great Depression and obviously after World War I, just kind of understanding that there is there's a fracture at the heart of the ideology itself. So I think a lot of what this chapter is going to sort of focus on, and I think the other chapters as well, is how did these different aspects of capitalist, the moral economy and Fordism and everything else, how did it respond to this crisis and how did it try to answer it? So one answer he talks about comes from people like Bruce Barton, Norman Vincent Peale, Dale Carnegie, who basically try to create this therapeutic ethos of business culture that reduces Christianity to a positive thinking of vitality, personal magnetism, and business success, which essentially just is still rampantly infesting just all of the U.S. Consumer culture, I think, still to this day, and in some ways is probably even more disgusting and egregious than it's ever been. So I was going to read a quick quote. Let me find it real fast. So this is on 370, and this is kind of coming from Bruce Barton. So Barton was a Protestant pastoral counselor who was guiding Americans from the proprietary faith to the new corporate dispensation. The story of Jesus that Barton related in, I believe, a book or a pamphlet called The Man Nobody Knows from 1925 was a tale of passage from artisanal to professional managerial labor. In the episode where Jesus, I'm so fucked.
I don't even believe in Jesus.
In the episode where Jebus famously admonishes his mother Mary, wist ye not that I must be about my father's business? Barton describes Joseph's business as a prosperous carpenter shop. But in the preface, Barton portrays Jesus as a deft executive who picked up 12 men from the bottom ranks of business and forged them into an organization that conquered the world. Just one of the most hilarious examples of Mammonism in the whole book to me up to this point.
That is Mammonism par excellence.
Yes.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of when the Christians first started evangelizing the Anglo-Saxons. The first Anglo-Saxon Saxon version of the Bible was like, talked about Jesus as if he was the leader of a war band and his disciples were his retainers, We'll fudge it a little bit. Disingenuous horseshit.
Yeah. It's called being propagandist to enough to utilize what moves people most.
Ooh, yeah.
No, actually, it's fucking disgusting.
Yeah.
It's, so far from even the palest echo of the spirit of the faith that it is its own thing.
This is one of those times whenever reality is just more comedic than anything you could write. Because I feel like that could just be an amazing skit or like a punchline to a joke of actually interpreting Jesus and the 12 apostles in that way. But that's,
different fucking religion, man. Mammonism.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Just because it uses some of the same, figures, that doesn't make it the same religion.
So for this first answer, McCarraher says there's a struggle on how much to rely on blatant Christian. God, man, I can't speak for shit tonight. Struggle on how much to rely on blatant Christian legitimation for unifying the new business culture of Fordism with God and dominion over the planet. And he kind of mentioned someone named Beard who sees a non-contradiction between spirituality and divine inspiration with material labor and things. And then he also kind of talks about C.F. Hirschfeld, who saw machines basically along the same lines as Aristotle's prime mover / the, God himself or some sort of divine creator being. New capitalism, which I think is kind of another answer being offered, was championed by businessmen of the 1920s, and it reoriented capitalism toward consumption with higher wages, the intro of corporate sponsored benefit plans, pensions, disability plans, and really was trying to, again, answer this sort of crisis in Mammonism through a more harmonious relation between labor and capital. Which is interesting because there's an element of this sort of new capitalism which saw it as the consummation of history at its most extreme. So it's got some big Fukuyama energy there a little bit. I think I actually wrote that as one of my notes. Just meme speak all the time.
Well, it's funny actually, right? Like the new capitalism of the 1920s and the progressive neoliberalism of today seem pretty fucking identical.
Yeah. I think we were
Even
talking
if the
about
New Deal. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to mention, I think we were starting to talk about in the last section too, that we're really seeing, those strong linkages between this particular era and then a lot of the dominant neoliberal ideology that we're still, fucking being brutalized by today.
Right. I mean, even if the argument, I think, and he makes it somewhat here in this chapter, that like the new capitalism of the 1920s and the New Deal of the 1930s like have a direct relationship, and that this sort of conscious capitalist is an important part of the myth of the New Deal, but it's also somewhat distinct, right? But its ideological grounds are there. This harmony between labor and capital, but the difference is that it's mediated by the state rather than labor being beaten into submission so it can have a harmonious relationship by the private armies of the industrialist.
Mm-hmm. So he also mentions that publications like Forbes start to become these organs of Mammonism, and essentially the writers become the moral economic priests of Mammonism. Okay, so there's one particular thing I wanted to pull out from this chapter that I thought would be especially fun to touch on. So this is on page 373 and 374. He talks about CEOs being recast as the new school of Athens. So he says, anointed as the vanguards of history, the new breed of executives were also recast as a modern school of Athens. Once derided as Philistines, I still deride them as Philistines, corporate leaders became, in the 1920s, Platonic sages and utopian visionaries. Let me see.
And
here.
Elon Musk.
Yeah,
Platonic
right.
state.
Yeah, the most dumb guy Platonic sage imaginable. So this is jumping to 374. He says, one writer for World's Work praised Alfred P. Sloan Jr., president of General Motors, for blending, quote, the man of action and the philosopher, unquote. Indeed, in The Real Wisdom, the publisher and journalist William Feather wrote in 1927, the intelligent businessman has far outdistanced the theoretical philosopher. And according to Charles Mitchell, president of the National City Bank of New York, the benevolent and profitable industrial practices of corporate statesmen were, quote, bringing to a near realization the dreams of utopians, unquote. So I think that was one of the most disgusting and vile things that in this whole section that I encountered. But I do think that is a really interesting thing, like how often even now, like CEOs and executives are either blatantly and consciously or not occupying this position of, like utopian visionaries and philosophers in a way that, like the old school, like Greek philosopher, like School of Athens image would have occupied that place instead. I feel like that's still a very strong trend today in capitalist ideology.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's funny because it's of how similar it is to the Southern planter class and their like sort of adopted image as kind of the philosopher kings of this kind of Platonic ideal of these, they're not just men of luxury, but because they have so much luxury in their lives, they're also, very well read and well bred, and they are like they are an elite in the classical sense of the term, and not just because they're in charge of human beings, but they actually are, constructors of a more ethical world because they're in charge of human beings. And it's like, this image of the kind of enlightened despot in the same way that the monarchs of like the Austro-Hungarian Empire would have cast themselves in a similar light. And it's like the height of delusion, but it's somehow sillier when it comes to the American industrialists in the 1920s.
Well, I'm confused. So that earlier you said that he mentioned that book about the Babbitt, the Sinclair Lewis book.
Yeah.
So with Sinclair Lewis trying to portray that sort of loyalty to the values of like the whatever entrepreneurial spirit as like exceptional, or was I thought that was supposed to be a portrayal of like a complete conformity to a set of like economic values? Is that
yeah?
Maybe I'm tired and just dumb, plain out dumb. So I just don't
We're all
know.
just real dumb. No, I think you're right. I think it was absolutely a critique of the just adoption of those values. But I think that a lot of people who were in the business community, their response to it was like dare to become a Babbitt as their response to the critique. Yeah.
Like
when Reagan said Rambo was a Republican, it's like, do you know what that fucking movie's about? It's about a guy who loses his mind and starts killing cops.
He's in the trees.
Yeah.
So, smart people aren't successful. It's the way it goes. Do you know any like really smart people that are your friends that are successful, or are all the successful people you know dumb as shit?
Well, when you put it that way.
I mean, it's pretty close. It's not a direct one-to-one, but it heavily skews in the direction that you're suggesting.
Yeah, exactly. The smartest people I know all have like low-paying shitty jobs. And the ones that are smart and don't have low-paying shitty jobs are like a fucking statistical outlier. They're an anomaly, you know?
Well, and they're smart at playing dumb so that they can maneuver in that horrible world.
They just have a different kind of intelligence that I don't have.
Yeah.
Like the one where they're like, Chris, what's your spirit animal? I'm like, oh, I don't give a fuck about this shit. I'm not participating in this group activity at work, you know?
and then you have this fucking general manager striking your name off a list of potential promotions. It's like, well, that's not a team player.
No.
Yeah, well, he also strikes her name off if you say an actual animal. He really wants you to say something like Missy Elliott or something, you know?
Yeah.
Well, what he wants you to say Megan Thee Stallion because the height of delusion at the present moment is that capitalism is woke.
Oh yeah,
And it's not all that different from what these fuckers were talking about in 1927.
At this job that I had, it was like they were like, you need to join one of these affinity groups, right? There's like Latino business people. There's
you should join that one.
LGBT entrepreneurs, and you're just supposed to join one of those. Even if you're not one of those people, so you can learn more about this, group in society. Listed the names of all these groups, and I kind of made a face. And so like, my manager is like, because I have no fucking poker face. And my manager was like, "What's wrong, Chris? You have a problem with like LGBT people or Latino people?" I was like, "No, I have a problem with business people."
You're
That's
not
the
making
only
Christianity better. You're making rock and roll worse.
Yeah, so I fucking didn't stay working at that job for very long.
All right, well, we're gonna attempt to be real pro podcasters here and keep going, even though
What do we have? Like 5 more chapters to talk
no,
about?
I'm gonna lay waste to these chapters. We're like halfway there.
Just read the titles of the chapters, and then that'll be good enough.
Yeah, let's read the titles and ruthlessly critique the titles.
I like the sound of that. So this is on page 375. He singles out 2 particularly vile creatures named Feline and Calkins. And he says that Feline and Calkins were the most visionary and grandiloquent of all the philosopher businessmen. Both believed that mass production augured a glorious new stage in human history, a quote-unquote business millennium, as Calkins put it, with eschatological flair, made possible by technology and a shorter workday, material abundance, and ample free time gave Americans the opportunity, in Feline's words, to partake of the life which the artists and poets and preachers are forever talking about. As pioneers...
Perfectly. That sounds exactly like the world we live in right now.
Yeah. I was actually going to say, doesn't that sound like Falk a little bit?
A little bit.
Or by a little bit, I mean completely like that thing that we hate.
A lot bit.
Yeah. As pioneers and settlers in the paradise of mass production, corporate managers and professionals were the avant-garde of human possibility, pointing the way to the final demolition of all obstacles to fulfillment. So anyway, yeah, I thought that was a good encapsulation of, again, kind of this adoption of the philosopher king / benevolent dictator sort of image of the CEO that starts to rise during this time. So one other thing here, he says that Calkins saw corporate enterprise as a modern venue for faith, conquest, and heroism. Since, and this is Calkins, he says there were no more dragons or Pacifics to conquer.
That's not what Jordan Peterson says.
That's true. And by conquering dragons, he means the ruthless subordination of anyone who is not a man in the structures of patriarchy.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rules are.
So the best thing about this book, and it's it's very much on display in this chapter right now, is that it really does help inculcate just a deep, seething, like merciless hatred of the capitalist class and their mouthpieces.
Yep.
That you've heard the expression, "When our time comes, we'll make no apologies for the terror." Like the reason why we can say things like that is because look at what they get to say.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just responding to the level of symbolic violence that is being deployed all the time.
That's just the dialectic, man. That's the antithesis right there.
Yeah.
We're gonna Alf-Hey-Bung these motherfuckers.
Gonna get Alf-Hey-Bunged at the fucking wall.
That's what I came here to do.
That's gotta be a new tagline for the network. We're gonna Alf-Hey-Bung these motherfuckers right here. I apologize to all of our Hegel stands out there. That's now ours. That's how we're going to use it. All right.
I apologize to our actual serious listeners.
Yeah.
Actually, like, fuck y'all. I mean, you know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
As for me, I make no apologies. I've never admitted to making a mistake.
Well, never explain myself, never apologize, and neither should you.
No, it means like, doesn't mean like abolish or like, or lift. What is it? Is it lift up or is it abolish? I don't know. I don't know what it means, but I think we agree. We agree that we're going to Alf-Hey-Bung this shit out of them.
Listen.
The thing is it's a German word, so it means like a fuckload of things.
It means like 6 different words.
Like abolish, transcend, suspend,
like
overcome.
Yeah, it also means like preserve or conserve.
Because that could be both, right? Suspend.
Yeah.
But we're only going to adopt the meanings that allow us to Alpha these motherfuckers. Gonna yeet them into the sun. That's the plan. All right.
And if we're ever questioned by the FBI, we could just use a different meaning of Alpha.
Like that isn't what I meant.
We'll use the meaning.
We're going to preserve them.
Did you say at 7:55 p.m. on 11/23/2020 that you quote are going to Alpha these motherfuckers? Well, officer, I did, but the thing that you have to understand about that term
is like, how's your German, officer? How good's your German?
Have you heard of somebody named Hegel? Okay, good. I'm glad you haven't because
I didn't mean what you think I meant.
Let me tell you the story of Hegel the Wise.
And then you pull an actual Hegel and just explain everything in Western philosophy to help him understand why you didn't mean Alpha the way he thinks you meant it. All right, I'm closing this chapter with a quote, and then we're moving on. So this is what's his name? Someone named Martin. I don't give a shit enough to give him his full name. I think he was a journalist. He was a founder of Harvard Lampoon. His name was Edward Sanford Martin. So this is Martin. He says, if business is to manage the world, it must be big business, very big indeed, comprehending all things. I just see the utter disgust on Chris's face right now.
It does.
Big business.
It fucking does run the world.
Yeah.
They got what they wanted.
Yeah.
They got exactly what they wanted.
I hate it.
Yep.
It's the worst thing. It's like the juice at the bottom of the trash can when you work in a restaurant.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, so I said this. I said this when we first started reading this book. Is like, oh God, it's so bad. And it only gets worse from here. Yeah. And every chapter makes me feel worse than the previous chapter did.
Yep.
Because I know when we get to the point where we're talking about today, it's going to be like, well, you know how it's like we are at the pinnacle, the culmination of all of this terrible theology, terrible politics, and all of its destructive effects. They're all happening right now. And there's nothing we can fucking do about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not that there's nothing we can do about it, but it's not looking good.
Yeah.
It's not currently looking very good.
Yeah, odds aren't in our favor, that's for sure. Well, on that note, we're swinging in the high with chapter 17, called The American Century and the Magic Kingdom, Mythologies of the Machine Age. So this is going out to all of our Disney stands out there. So the business millennium's obscuring of other social choices for social organization, which could have been industrial democracy, also Bolshevism, also fascism, depended on it being effective as a myth. And so this is really going to focus on 3 key myth makers of the Fordist ethos that McCarraher is going to focus on. 1, Thurman Arnold. 2, Henry Luce, who apparently might also be implicated in the JFK assassination.
No shit.
Yeah. Allegedly. Yeah, I've heard some conspiracy theories that try to tie Henry Luce to the CIA and to the JFK assassination. That's going to be our next Patreon episode.
No kidding. Awesome.
I am kidding. That is a blatant lie. But we should do something like that. And then third would...
we'll tie it into Toy Story.
I was going to say, is that going to be on the Atlantis podcast?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, on the Atlantis Podcasting Network.
Yeah.
Atlantis Blasters 3000. All right. We got some work to do.
Yeah, I'm in.
Let's do it. So I guess I wanted to maybe kind of start with this. He defines a myth in the way that we're going to talk about it in terms of Fordism as a tale that purports to both explain and justify a social order. Thoughts about that?
Yeah. That's a decent working definition. I mean, if you think about what the function of myth is in culture,
Yeah.
that's kind of what it does. Like, you know, the myth of a returning messiah to extract vengeance upon the present social order isn't one of those, but its lasting legacy as myth is only the result of that religious tradition becoming the social order.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm prepared to accept this as a working definition of myth.
Sure. So say we all?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay.
So say we all.
So say we all. All right. So we're going to focus on Thurman
Word.
Arnold first. Also word. Also an acceptable response to that. So I wanted to actually get y'all's take on Thurman Arnold in particular, mainly because of this. So this is a couple of points he uses to just kind of summarize Arnold as one of these key myth makers. He was one of the greatest U.S. satirists, and he was also an expert in theology. He brutally criticized capitalist enchantment. He also kind of mentions he was extremely impatient and frustrated with the Supreme Court's hostility to the New Deal. But I think this is the real reason he picks out Arnold here. So Arnold develops this theory of enchantment, where he says that all societies have two governments, one a spiritual government and the other a temporal government. So basically, a spiritual government presides over symbols, ideas, mythology, and magic, and the temporal government supervises the daily business of production and politics. So I guess whenever I got to this, it struck me that is this really kind of the generative basis of McCarraher's whole approach in the book, like as a whole? Is this sort of theory of Arnold's idea that there's the spiritual and a temporal government? And maybe to sort of respond to one of my own criticisms earlier, I mean, can we think about this whole book as essentially an explication and then critique of what he sees as the spiritual government of capitalism? Not just of Fordism, maybe, but of capitalism in general.
Well, it's not to say that he doesn't have the other critique, but this book is not a deployment of that critique.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that, you know, his take on the ascribing of a spiritual nature to Mammonism is one of misplaced ascribing of spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't believe that Mammonism has a spirituality. He believes that it's false.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's the only reason I would say no to that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that's okay. He does, but he is still talking about this false spirituality as serving the role of, if not officially official, then quasi-official ideology, in the same way that like the Islamic Republic of Iran has a fairly explicit and official ideology.
Well, I mean, I think that, okay, yeah, so this version of Christianity that fucking WASPs subscribe to, you know, Americans subscribe to, is just fucking Mammonism. So yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That being said, though, this is interesting to me. Like, if McCarraher is a Christian, I don't know of what stripe or whatever. Does he believe in hell and the devil? And if so, does he believe that the United States government and all of the churches and everybody is just actually worshiping Satan? Because Mammon is an aspect of evil. He doesn't mention it, but is that what he thinks?
McCarraher, if you're out there and you're listening, come on the Lost Horizons Network. Answer that question.
Because I just want to say that
five episodes into a series where we just fucking tear apart your book and you're still listening.
We don't really tear it apart.
Yeah.
He's Roman Catholic, though, right?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure he's Roman Catholic.
On his This Is Hell interview, he described himself as a Christian, but he didn't say anything
that's all
else.
he said.
Yeah.
He sounds like a Catholic. He talks like a Catholic. But, yeah. If that's the case, though, if that's what he thinks, then fucking I'm in. Yeah. The United States government is satanic. We should destroy it.
Shit, it turns out Alex Jones was right all along.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. We are supporting the worship of Satan by participating in capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not in the good way.
Not in the good way.
Yeah, not like in a cool way, like a Slayer way.
Yeah. I was gonna say not in like like Black Sabbath kind of a way, in a real stupid dumb guy shit way.
Like in an Anton LaVey way, you mean then? Like a fucking Ayn Rand but edgier kind of way.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
that's pretty much right, actually.
Yeah, that's ultimate dumb guy shit right there.
Gotta say, I really love all the twists and turns this episode is taking tonight. All right, so I want to build on Arnold's theory of enchantment here. So McCarraher says, and I guess this is him talking about Arnold, that crises arise when there's a conflict between the spiritual and temporal governments. And so he describes how the Depression and the crisis of the 1930s essentially caused a breaking of the spiritual government's myths through the economic crisis of the Great Depression. So, I mean, maybe, this isn't necessarily useful to describe every particular aspect and section of the book, but at the very least, in this particular period, that he sees this as a useful theory, I guess, for Arnold to try to talk about. Here we go. So Arnold suggested that New Deal liberals euthanize the old spiritual government, which I think was actually McCarraher's language, but to not completely renounce the accepted spiritual doctrine, but instead to subtly add new features to mystify the anomalies of the crisis between the spiritual and temporal governments breaking down after the Great Depression. So McCarraher says, with his bemused contempt for common people, Arnold represents in this view a new, more technocratic form of liberalism that relied less on Republican virtue and more on professional virtuosity. But those who share, and he also was kind of referencing Lasch, who is critiquing Arnold on this point, but he says, but those who share Lasch's populist umbrage must explain the persistence of popular enchantment in the face of a system so exploitative. So I guess that I found that pretty interesting because in a way he's trying to still say, critique Arnold all you want, but it doesn't help us understand why people, continue to support this system that brutalizes them even in the face of this like massive crisis. Which I don't know if you all have any thoughts about that. I want to comment on kind of what I would pose as the question of voluntary servitude, which goes all the way back to Etienne de la Boétie in the 16th century about why the fuck do not all the people just rise up and overthrow the king or whoever the monarch is? Still kind of the same question to me.
I think we live in a particularly defanged period in history. I mean, if you look at let's say from Reconstruction through industrial unionism, through popular socialism into the Popular Front era and the civil rights and anti-Vietnam / whatever, the long 60s. This is a pretty unbroken chain for about 100 years of popular resistance flaring up even several times within generations and certainly from generation to generation. And always there's a North Star in the sense of there being something to aspire to. And then by the late 80s, early 90s, all of the things to aspire to, all the gods have failed. And the intellectuals taught us the new intellectuals taught us that faith and belief and meta-narratives are all actually the problem. And so why don't the people rise up now? It's just maybe a little bit harder to bring yourself to bang your face into the brick wall this time if you don't think it's going to break.
Yeah.
But historically, I just don't think it's true that the people don't rise up. I think we've just not won yet.
So I guess I would just throw it back then to say, I mean, do you think that this comes back to some of that skepticism or just particular focus that McCarraher has, that he would still kind of pose this question, right? Like, how do you explain the support of the capitalist system? I mean, do you think that there is a huge occlusion of all of this history of popular uprising to even throw that statement out there?
Sorry, there's a huge what of it?
Occlusion.
Yeah.
Occlusion?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means.
It means to make hidden.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Well, in that case, I do think so. I do think in university courses of studying, economics prior to the Russian Revolution, you read Marx. You read Smith, Ricardo, Marx, etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of understanding political economy. And then they invented a thing called economics, which is not political economy, because economics is not political because, goddamn it, look what the Russians did. So they, the more it becomes, the more you could say ideology becomes material force and is a threat to it. They hide it more now. And so then you have these like popular renderings of the 1960s and, you know, the hippie movement as, you know, this period when people wanted to be more free. And then they kind of got it because look at how much more free we are now. You can have long hair at this job because we're cool. We're like a cool company. And that comes at the expense of a memory of the hippies as the ones who, you know, disrupted commerce and rejected commerce. And Lyndon Johnson was afraid might overthrow them and usher in communism. And some of whom actually set bombs and stuff. Like, you know, they're doing a really good job of hiding the history of popular revolt.
And we've all been convinced that we're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's been a pretty heavy campaign of indoctrination into the, you know, the stake that we hold in capitalism, to where you've got someone making $30,000 a year freaking the fuck out about the idea that maybe people who make $400,000 a year might have to pay like a little bit more in taxes.
That could be me one day.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, no, it couldn't.
Wrong.
But if it could, all you have to really think about is how those fuckers will still be fine. But anyways, those fuckers, everyone who makes any money, you know,
Dumb people.
people who are dumb and bad.
Yeah. I will say, though, to what you were mentioning, Jason, about, you know, how violent and widespread the resistance was. I think I mentioned this on the episodes we did with Varn about the book Days of Rage. I think maybe it was 1972 or 1973. There were over 3,000 bombings in a single year from radical revolutionary groups who were bombing government buildings, all sorts of shit. So again, you know, that history is there. You just got to kind of look for it, or kind of look where it isn't hidden so much.
Right. And that's within the broader context of the freedom rides, the lunch counter sit-ins, mass demonstrations of millions of people around the country over and over again for like a full, 10 years? And increasingly, you know, the creation of such a threatening network of like radical groups that, you know, the FBI had to develop like a systematic approach to disrupting them and like propagating divisive ideas within them. Like, what's that book? The Secret War on America's Radicals? I forget the author.
Aaron J. Leonard.
Yeah, this was fantastic, you know, sort of reminder of all of this, you know, occluded history.
Yep.
That's like, it's all within reach, but it's just not taught at all. And that's not unique to American capitalism or even to capitalism, right? Because you go to Paris and try to find a statue of Robespierre, and you can't. Because why would you ever want to enshrine the memory of somebody like that? It might give you some ideas. It's like, because there are a lot of heads that should be getting chopped off right now.
Yeah. Alpha bone those motherfuckers.
That's right.
And by that, we mean to preserve them with the guillotine.
To lift them up.
To suspend them.
Yes.
Like in a gelatinous liquid.
Like in a vat full of acid. Allegedly.
In Minecraft.
Yeah, in Minecraft.
Suspend them in flames for eternity.
Funny. When you said suspend them, the image that popped into my mind immediately was at the beginning of the Bram Stoker's Dracula, like the film version, when they're doing the backstory, and there's just all like hundreds of dudes on pikes in front of his castle.
I remember that.
I think I'd like to suspend them just like that.
You know,
Well, I was thinking from
preserve
like
the memory.
I was thinking from tree branches, but you know, whatever. Fucking lamp posts.
Yeah, well, you know, I believe in a diversity of tactics.
I can believe in that kind of diversity of tech.
Yeah, I now support that phrase. All right, here we go. We're talking Henry Luce. So Henry Luce was the founder of a trio of magazines, all still around: Time, Fortune, and Life. And McCarraher says that they provided sentimental education to the business elite. So they essentially aim to make the corporate intelligentsia into the American clerisy and avant-garde. And basically, he says that these magazines and sort of their, you know, demonic scions who apparently read them flying across the country or whatever the hell they were doing. They had national. They were flying planes around this time, right?
What? 30s?
Yeah, they had planes.
Yeah, they had planes.
You could book a flight. I could book a transatlantic flight.
That's what I was thinking.
By that point.
Well, because whenever I think about these magazines, I always imagine the shit that's like stuffed in the back seat of the planes, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. Planes aren't real.
And you think about like all the Indiana Jones movies are set in the 30s, and like one of the most memorable recurring things is the little plane and the red line that goes across the map.
Oh yeah. All right.
That's how you know.
He also has an RPG in one of them, which wasn't developed for many years later.
There you go. So
It's not an RPG. It's a Panzerfaust.
Which also wasn't invented then.
That's true.
oh shit! Now the daggers really come out.
Panzerfaust has a
I
much
think
more
that-
rounded warhead, though, on it.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you stumbled onto Don's area of expertise.
Oh, you're talking about the scene at the sort of the climax of Raiders of the Lost Ark when he's like, "I'm going to blow up the Ark,"
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We wouldn't be able to do that.
No. I mean, also, they're flying an experimental plane that didn't ever actually get produced in Nazi Germany, and it wasn't even being experimented on until the mid-40s.
Yeah.
So
Well, as far as you know, it's the thing about secret experiments. They don't fucking tell you about it.
that's true. They don't.
Yeah, only Hollywood can reveal the secret experiments done by the Nazis.
I just
The
looked.
only ones allowed.
I just looked up that fucking RPG, and it's definitely not a Panzerfaust. It's definitely like fucking Cold War era, like Soviet RPG.
Yeah, it looks like something that Rambo would have used in the third movie.
Well, I was thinking what they did is they had some excess stock left over after they sold all they could to the Taliban, and then they were like, "Well, listen, they're making a movie over here. Let's just sell it to the crew of Indiana Jones." Taliban has theirs.
So, what could he have used since we're here? Since we have already taken this step. If you were going to write that scene, but you can't use the, any kind of projectile explosion that could be handled, like no bazookas, no whatever. What could he have used to still make that scene work?
I mean, there's like World War I era grenade launchers that are just like little snub nosed, sort of like they look like shotguns with a giant barrel, like those.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, then
A rifle
fuck them then.
grenade.
Oh yeah, rifle grenade.
Yeah.
But you guys are talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh.
we're talking about Eugene McCarraher's book. Try to keep up, man.
Yeah, man, did you miss that part in chapter
It's an
17?
RPG too.
Huh?
What? It's an RPG.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. And you're saying those weren't made yet?
No, those aren't.
All right, listen.
A rocket propelled grenade.
All right, you motherfuckers. This is literally like the Kronstadt Rebellion, and I'm just going to ruthlessly just put you all down. We're moving on. We're done. We're done with this. Well, I won't stand for this bullshit anarchism on this episode. Okay.
I can see why you thought it was a Panzerfaust, though.
We're done. We are done. All right. So it's going to be fucking 1 a.m. by the time we're done with this stupid episode. All right, here we go. So this trio of magazines from Luce, they basically spoke for the hegemonic bloc of the New Deal coalition, which essentially included investment firms, capital-intensive industries, mass merchandisers, and international commercial banks. But Luce had a hardcore eschatological view on the role of the U.S. as a global hegemon, and basically saw us as lifting all up to the lower order of the angels. And he also said that the Good Samaritan also must be the American centurion, which sounds a lot like neoliberal interventionist rhetoric today. So we're going to move on to the third myth maker of the Fordist era, which is the infamous anti-Semite Walt Disney. Yeah, I was going to say, you motherfuckers better not debate me on that. No lies detected. I'm not saying that to you. That was like to everyone. All you motherfuckers out there throughout the world.
I don't know anything about Walt Disney.
I mean, that's pretty much all it. Just horrible anti-Semite. Don's just shrugged and just like, yep.
I don't know. I've been to Disneyland and it didn't seem that anti-Semitic.
Oh, you didn't see all the Gestapo, the Disney police force? Did you see earlier someone was posting that there's a Mickey
Disney
Mouse
challenge coins? Is that what you're talking about? The Disney Police Force challenge coins?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is like the Punisher skull, but it's Disney. It's like Mickey Mouse's head.
And the thin blue line across this fucking thing.
Yeah.
To what?
Yeah.
We truly live in the worst of all possible world.
Yeah. That really sealed the deal for me when I saw it.
Yeah.
Big shout out to Comrade Remy for sharing that in the RL Discord, which is cursing my fucking whole existence with that image. Thanks, Remy. So Walt Disney saw the role of Disney as basically re-enchanting the modern world, which he saw as devoid of play, fantasy, and magic. And McCarraher has this interesting comment where he says that films like Dumbo and Snow White also contained these sort of like populist parables, but were, again, kind of like captured within the certain myth making that Disney was engaged in. And he says that films like Fantasia, though, were part of the sentimental modernism elements of Disney. So he basically says that Disney and the production of films out of Disney and really just culture in general, mass commodified culture, was part of the spiritual government along with radio. And essentially what they did was link together faith with technological innovation and a desire for rapturous connection with the world. So I think that just to tie this back in, I mean, if there is a form of an attempt, at least, to re-enchant the world through this lens of Mammonism, he sees, I think that Disney is probably the best example of it from what McCarraher is describing. So Alex, you're going to love this one. He also says that Disney's images and portrayals in the films were very Jungian and attempted to unearth the modern myths and provided a kind of mythical therapy for the machine age. Do you have any comments? Because we're obviously such big Jung stans.
I'm big mad. You would invoke my name and then continue reading that line. It's okay, I'm not that mad. No, I don't have any comments.
Okay.
Fuck Jung, that's my comment.
Yeah, that is also my comment. Fuck Jung. All right, so I'm going to read a quick quote here on... Oh, yeah. So he says that rationalization of enchantment and the enchantment of rationalization were these sort of two tendencies that were operating within Disney mass cultural production. So this is on page 388. So I believe he's quoting Seldis, who I can't remember exactly who this is, but I thought this captured a good sort of just like simple, succinct way to say this. He says in Disney animations, quote, the machine becomes human, Zelda surmised. Just when humanity is afraid, mankind will all be turned into a machine. So I think that he sees that really what Disney is doing here is, again, trying to sort of like pair together enchantment with rationalization and seeing them as kind of like two aspects of the same process.
You know who else does that is J.D. Bernal, or Bernal, whatever. Who's a Marxist.
Yeah, I was like, why do I know that name?
He talks about fucking machine people in the future and doesn't think that sounds horrifying.
Yeah, we mentioned him in our episode that we did on Marxist romanticism.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Blaze him. 420 blaze him. Here we go. So we got to touch on old Wally Benjamin and his interpretation.
Oh, yeah, Wally B.
Yeah, Wally B, my boy. Big ups. R.I.P. Wally B. But I do love this line. He says that Benjamin, this is McCarraher, he says that Benjamin attributed to Disney films the same double meaning he saw in cinema generally. The depiction of figures in a collective dream enacting both the nightmare of the present and the prospect of utopian transformation. So I think at least like Benjamin has a pretty complex view of Disney and kind of sees these two tendencies operating at once. Mm-hmm. But funny enough, yeah, go for it.
I like the way that he says that they depict a life of everyday insult redeemed by small evanescent triumphs, and that's the palliative you get actually from ideology in a concentrated, produced way. Mm-hmm. That's the salve you get to soothe your burns as you walk through the fucking hellscape.
And those two quotes, right, were his like earlier beliefs on it, and then I think later he. Like on 389, right? Mm. It's like, but over time, Benjamin discerned a more repressive agenda, not only in the rodents' comic antics, but also in all of Disney's work. And that's when that quote that you read first, with the no revolutionary consequences, comes from.
Yeah, he says that Disney both encouraged sadistic violence and immunized audiences against mass psychosis. I don't know how else to describe Toy Story except by that exact line.
I don't know how else to describe fucking modern entertainment at all. Like,
yeah.
One of my favorite TV shows, maybe the best one ever, is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And that's just like pure fucking nihilism pumped right into my veins, you know?
Just fucking jack it right into my eyeballs. Just right into my jugular. Just give me it right now. All right, so let's also touch on someone I found to be a little surprising to show up in this section, which is Sergei Eisenstein.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was surprising.
He was most expressive in his praise of Disney Enchantment, and he basically said that the escapism of Disney was temporary but still emancipatory, and he saw it as a political and metaphysical revolt, and that basically Disney was reversing the disenchantment of the modern world and leading back to a paradise regained. And so I was going to read a quick quote on page 390. Through his depictions of magic, Disney connected desires for metaphysical transfiguration with submission to Fordist techniques. Enabling an untrammeled imaginative freedom, animation issued a unique protest against the metaphysical immobility of the once and forever given. And that was Eisenstein, actually. And this is also Eisenstein. He says, you tell a mountain move, and it moves. You tell an octopus... Don is already so mad about this. You tell an octopus, be an elephant, and the octopus becomes an elephant. More than any of his contemporaries, Disney wedded the desire for enchanted communion to the drive for total dominion. Don is big mad.
Why would you want to become an elephant if you're a fucking octopus? Stupid.
Oh, that's right. I was like, why is he mad? But I remember
Don
that.
would have preferred to say, you tell the octopus to octopus, and the octopuses.
He would have preferred it if you said you tell an octopus to become an elephant, and the octopus looks at you in disdain.
Spits in your fucking face.
It ink blasts all over your fucking face.
So I mean, Eisenstein gave us fucking montages, right? So like fuck Eisenstein. I don't know. I like cartoons. You guys like cartoons? I feel like
I don't think. So, on the subject of shots which have been fired, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say "fuck Eisenstein," and it hurts as much as the first time you ever hear an insult.
Montages.
The problem with fucking the Harry Potter movies where they do like 4 montages to skip through what should have been an hour's worth of acting isn't Eisenstein's problem. That's the problem with Harry Potter.
Okay, maybe it's not Eisenstein, but the montage as a film technique is just, it's like you never foresaw how horrible that was going to become for us.
Yeah,
well, Eli Whitney thought the cotton gin would actually help bring about the end of slavery. So
it's like a Marvel movie. It's essentially just a montage, a giant montage that's held together by action scenes.
Right.
So, and it's not Eisenstein's fault that film is dead.
It's not Eisenstein's fault that there is no longer a possibility for something that we used to call art.
Yeah, I mean, he did use Lenin when he was teaching, right? He's the one who had Lenin quotes in his film theory. Am I crazy? I don't know.
No, you're not crazy. I actually have a couple of volumes of Eisenstein's film theory, but I'm not quite enough of a nerd to have made my way through them. Just enough to have them.
I'm pretty sure there's Lenin in there somewhere. I don't know how he uses it or if it's revolutionary in any way, but
just look at fucking stone-faced Adam over here. Like, how many times do I have to say we have to fucking move on?
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna shut up about it.
Actually, that's not why I'm stone-faced. I'm stone-faced because I'm basically taking notes for whenever all you motherfuckers get thought gulagged for everything that you just said. How dare you?
What about
You're gonna get
which
the
part?
shit out of us.
You motherfuckers might be off my phone. Actually, I do think that Alex saying "fuck montage," y'all like cartoons, might be one of my favorite things that's ever been said on an episode. That better be in the fucking final cut of this thing.
Yeah, it will be. It has to be.
Yeah, that was pretty solid gold. All right, we're moving on. Oh, I lost my place. Hold on. All right. We're
I feel
good.
like every time you say thought gulag, I think THOT.
Yeah.
Please send me to the thought gulag.
Yeah, this is the thought gulag. I will tell you earlier, whenever we were talking about big business, I just wanted to say thick business.
Hey. No more meme talk.
All right, no more mean talk. Only big people talk. No more talk for babies.
Yeah. On the subject of delusion.
So y'all's mom can go to bed. All right, here we go. So Disney combined. So Eisenstein saw Disney as combining metaphysical transfiguration with Fordist techniques, and that essentially enchantment plus submission to power of modern technology is kind of what was happening in Disney films. But McCarraher says it would pacify, but ultimately not fulfill that desire. So Too bad they didn't read some McGowan. Just realized that's not possible in the first place. Yeah, I know. I see. Shots fired. Shots fired over at another reading series we're doing. All right, here we go. Chapter 18. A New Order and Creed. Human Relations as Fordist Moral Philosophy. I have to tell you, I think the reason why I picked this section is because I wanted to do the Human Relations chapter. I don't think I really took a whole lot of notes on this, honestly. So we're gonna 420 blaze these mofos. So he sees that corporate management is the least exotic branch of the temporal government, and that the new management hierarchy that emerged after the CEO drives in the 1930s set the stage for managerial capitalism that flourished until the 1980s. So basically, this managerial revolution was a response to the Bolshevik revolution and labor unrest, kind of like what we were saying earlier. So he talks briefly about Edward Mayo and the emergence of human relations. That was not just a strategy of class warfare. He also sees it as a type of spiritual government from Arnold's theory that we talked about in the last chapter. He talks about the emergence of HR as a scholasticism of corporate management. And there's this, I thought, a pretty interesting line here where he talks about workers would receive a full garage and the world's highest culture in exchange for loss of control and craft pride. And that was for unionized workers only. And really quick, I just wanted to say, we touched on this briefly. It reminds me of something that Luke Boltanski and Eve Chiaparello talk about in their book, The New Spirit of Capitalism, where after 1968, essentially the deal that's made is, or at least the deal that is imposed, is essentially for a lot of the managerial class that essentially, and capitalism in general, and corporations, is that you were being, for security and stability in your employment, you're being traded that for more quote-unquote flexibility in the workplace and in how you do your work. So I think that there's a way that, again, seeing these like trade-offs is like, well, we'll give you this in exchange for actual, like your share of surplus value and and actually like control over your work and pride. Well, I guess in a way that maybe this is saying that, yeah, I don't know. I guess like the idea that there are these trade-offs that happen at these different points, that basically like you lose control of your work and craft pride in exchange for like consumption and commodification. But then after 1968, it seems like it goes the other way. It's like you get control back, but then you lose any sense of stability in the work that you have.
Well, you get a pale image, a pastiche of control. You don't get any real control.
All right, we're going to talk about Mary Parker Follet, who basically McCarraher talks about as sort of a kind of fundamental figure in the development of HR. And basically she combined Taylorism, pragmatism, psychology, and nebulous religious sensibilities. And for Follet, she saw the workplace was a portal to aesthetic, metaphysical, spiritual, and moral truths, which that's obviously the case still to this day.
Totally.
Exactly like what you were talking about, Chris, with those affinity groups.
Yeah, exactly.
So there was a coactive power of managers and workers versus coercive power, I think, in at least this sort of more like utopian dimension to it. But new corporate power was built on functionary unity instead of equality or arbitrary authority. So I think that was essentially like what they were hoping was going to be the solution here, was that, again, almost having this functionalist idea of corporations and institutions would operate and keep things together instead of any, bullshit idea about equality, but also arbitrary authority, which I thought was interesting. I just put this in here for the big philosophy nerd shit. He makes a comment about Alfred North Whitehead, his support of post-grad business schools. There's really not much else to say about it, except that not that I'm surprised. I don't know. I never thought of like Whitehead as particularly radical or revolutionary per se. But Mayo declares HR basically says it can affect the strong and simply religious feelings of medieval times. And basically it was going to help reinculcate those into the modern capitalist system. Talks a little bit about Peter Drucker, who I had heard of, and I guess I didn't really know who Drucker was. I'm not going to go into it very much, but he says that he was sort of like the figure of human relations, and I think was around for just decades upon decades from what McCarraher was saying. I essentially thought...
Well, there's also two Peter Druckers. The other one is the other one's a Trotskyist, and not this guy at all.
This is one of the few instances I was not thinking of the Trotskyist whenever I think of two different people.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about HR.
Do it.
Being religious, and I just got to say that HR religion is that big youth pastor energy. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there it is.
It's that.
That's why I fucking hate it so much.
I know. You get the same kind of cringy, like, you know, the hair raised on the back of your neck, like vomit in the back of your throat whenever you hear your HR person talking to you about living the lifestyle that exudes the values of the company that you do when you hear the youth pastor say, "Who's here to rock for Jesus?" You know?
Chills.
All right, sorry.
Hey, how much of an overlap do you think there is between youth pastors and people who eventually go into HR or are in HR already?
I'm going to predict it's a lot.
98%.
Yeah, I was going to say the Venn diagram is just two circles completely coincidental with each other.
Yeah.
It's the same picture meme.
Oh, I'm going to make that after we're done with this episode. That's on the way.
Coming soon.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and close this motherfucker out with chapter 19, which I'm gonna make very quick work of. So this chapter, which I feel like we have touched on in some previous sections, maybe the previous section that I did, this also has the longest chapter title of any that I can recall. It's called "Beauty as the New Business Tool: Advertising, Industrial Design, and the Enchantment of Corporate Modernism."
Sounds like a course you can take.
The new sacred symbolic firmament for the spiritual government is sort of all kind of encapsulated around this increasing idea of beauty as the center of sort of artistic design, industrial design in this particular era. So, again, we're talking about advertising, this sort of swelling of commercial art, PR, industrial design. So McCarraher says that beauty becomes the shibboleth of visual and design experts for installing it into factories and derricks. Yeah, so he quotes, I don't think this isn't Richard Rorty, it's some other Rorty. But he basically says that beauty becomes an aesthetic refuge for enchantment and corporatism, but was a capitalist parody of the sacramental imagination. And was an attempt to imbue commodities with the aura of sacred objects. Yeah, I'm not even just like registering anything y'all are saying at this point. I'm just like locked into the notes. Here we go. So sort of use of beauty as this way of, this aesthetic refuge for enchantment, even though it was just a parody of it. He says business leaders and PR and artists sought to foster common understanding, common feelings, and common reactions. And this does bring up, who you mentioned a bit ago, Jason, which is old Wally Lipp, or our friend of the show, Walter Lippmann, his idea of modern communion.
Wally Lips.
Yeah, actually, I was going
to... Sounds like a Dick Tracy bad guy.
Yeah. He's just got a oversized gun. I don't know why. It just sounds like digital. Anyway, cut this out, Alex. Here we go. So I want to read
Alex, you got to cut out every single time Adam yells, "Here we go."
Yeah.
But you need to release a supercut of every time he yells out. So at the end of the episode, there's just going to be a "Here we go" over and over and over and over and over.
And then there's EDM music behind it.
Dude, hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Here we go. It's more like a fucking house music.
Yeah, it's a little bit more house energy for sure. So this is William Allen White. So this is on page 404. He says, William Allen White remarked that the real revolutionist is not the Bolshevik, but the advertising man. Could I control the advertising publications of this country, I would control the entire land.
It's like that fucking Elon Musk tweet where he's like, actually, the real Karl Marx was really a capitalist. He wrote a whole book about it. I'm the real socialist.
I don't agree, but I respect it, honestly. All right. So McCarraher says that there was a divide and contradiction for many artists who were in the role of developing art and producing art in the corporate landscape, who basically says that modernism is still connected by an umbilical cord to the dominant classes, despite how much autonomy it appeared to have, and that corporate modernism basically convinced business leaders that they defeated the forces of fine art snobbery. So there started to be a lot more leeway for artists to be creative and free in their work, and especially in advertising and marketing. And McCarraher says that it basically supplied corporations and their cultural elites with not just aesthetic prestige and resources, but also a visual inventory of enchantment that showed commodities opened up something transcendent in the world. Which I will have to say, maybe this is something we can come back to, so this isn't a 24-hour episode. But the idea of a visual inventory of enchantment I thought was very interesting, and maybe we're talking about more.
Yeah, well, and the complete subordination of the arts to commerce.
Mm-hmm.
is a subject that I'm very interested in repeatedly returning to, because I think one of the most harmful delusions that exists on the left is that you can produce emancipatory art.
Oof, shots fired right there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, look, I don't mean that like don't try. I don't mean like don't make art if you're, you know, a person on the left. I just don't agree with Brecht that art is a hammer with which to shape the world. I think it's more like a mirror that reflects it.
Or
maybe
maybe
it's
a hammer
like
made out of mirrors. That
It's a really shiny hammer that you can see your reflection in while you're hitting stuff.
It's a
Actually,
pair of
honestly-
ducks made out of mirror glass.
Honestly, that's probably closer to how I really feel about it, you know?
Yeah.
That like, you know, art in service of a like material concrete project in the form of the party, you know, whatever it is, can have a sort of socially constructive utility, like Beethoven's music and elevating the spirit, but not on its own.
Would you say we're making art here, Jason? Or
Oh, if anybody's making art anywhere, it's us here.
absolutely.
We are the only ones who are making art anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
just elevating like Beethoven?
That's right.
We're alpha boonging this motherfucker. That's what we're doing.
I think we've alpha boonged ourselves at this point.
Yeah. I've definitely negated
we sat
my
next to the
negation.
alpha boom too long, and it alpha boomed all over us.
God damn it.
All right. We're almost done. Keep your shit together. So this is an example of how this sort of use of aesthetics and beauty we're operating. So this is on page 408. So this is from a publication called Printers Inc. in 1925. It says, "You do not sell a man tea, but the magical spell which is brewed nowhere else but in a teapot." So that was a good encapsulation of pretty much like this whole section for me.
That's true. Like the Mad Men scene when they finally break through on how to sell the fucking machine where you click it and it shows different photos on the wall that it projects. They call it the carousel.
The slide
He tells
projector,
that-
yeah.
He uses a bunch of photos from his family, from his own life experience, and he describes the carousel as like a time machine that allows you to revisit all of the greatest memories of your life or whatever, and all the fucking executives are crying. And in that scene, you're supposed to see like, this guy's a genius. And he is a genius, but like, you know, in service of sheer madness.
Just like Joseph Goebbels.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Alex, you should put in the air horns on that thing that Chris just said.
I was going to comment something about tea and the like East India Company, but I lost it. I don't know. I was going to say tea is just the most evil thing. It's just dirty water, and people buy it. I don't understand.
Honestly, when Adam said the word tea, I was like, I'm gonna make some tea after this. So.
I'm sorry.
I'm not
Good
sure
job,
if I actually want to be
colonizer.
on the record in this episode saying that the art is impossible without qualifying it a lot. So I don't know what to do about that.
Just fucking own your shit. Dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, if you don't like it, fucking try to at me. I'm not on Twitter. Fuck you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yell at him in the Discord, though.
Yeah, that's right. Give us money and join the Discord
So you can yell at Jason about saying art is impossible.
Oh, that's how you sell it.
That's right.
That was some Don Draper shit.
That's
right
how you
there.
know art is dead. Undead.
All right. Did that run its course? We good?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. So the beatific vision of corporate modernism was a world redeemed by commodities. The secularization of the spiritual overtones of sacred images and iconography were just completely rampant and built in to this depiction of commodities at this point. McCarraher describes it as a type of aesthetic oligarchy, which I thought was a good phrase. But I think people like Calkins thought it would abolish the ugliness and spiritual poverty of mechanization. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't even think like McCarraher is giving this any credit to having like a utopian sort of populist dimension. It's just a complete self-delusion that you could actually create beauty and art in any context like this, and it would ever be anything more than, like a parody of itself. So art critics joined in the chorus for praising industrial design, people like Sheldon and Mary Cheney, and magazines introduced readers to industrial designs through beatific aesthetic representations of their aura. He talks a little bit about Le Corbusier and things about sort of urban design and how beautiful buildings can produce happy people. And people like Teague saw industrial design as the long-lost unity of art and practical life, and had echoes of the arts and crafts movement the arts and crafts movement of people like John Ruskin and William Morris.
So the problem here is that these things aren't inherently false. They aren't like not true.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not the case that like aesthetic beauty doesn't have an impact on that sort of intangible internal essence we have that we call the soul. At least for me, when I wander through a neighborhood and I see one of these fucking could be anywhere type of constructions, which is like a CrossFit gym below, and then like an inexplicable cheese grater style building that people live in. It hurts my soul when I know that there are actually beautiful buildings somewhere else. The problem here is, of course, that you're trying to imagine that you could overcome alienation with aesthetic beauty, when in fact all you can really do is create negative associations with those things because of the alienation people still feel, because they still live under capitalism, no matter how fucking pretty you try to make it. But loosed from those moorings, right? Loosed from the profit system, the things that they're saying about the image and about architecture, I think that they become true.
I'll buy that.
I think the image would argue with you, but I'm too tired to support that argument.
It's good that it's out there.
All right, so let's wrap this shit up. So by the end of World War II, unfortunately, or maybe expectedly, the gulf between beauty and business widens yet again, and fine art and commercial art also become separated into two distinct domains. So even though the business community would support and patronize modernists as collectors and connoisseurs of art, and that would continue, there was no longer this sort of unification or attempt to employ more avant-garde artists as part of this aspect of the spiritual government and the use of beauty and aesthetics to specifically create these auras around commodities. So I'm going to read really fast the final quote, and then that is it for my notes for section 5, Mammon number 5. So this is the very final paragraph. He says, the mechanized magic and religion of Fordism provoked a host of infidels. Although the Great Depression triggered indictments of capitalism for its instability and injustice, it also intensified a body of criticism that aimed at its toll and human destruction. In this prophetic modernism, unemployment, poverty, and alienation posed something far worse than a range of quote-unquote social problems. They were, as James Agee put it, predicaments of human divinity, indisputable evidence of sacrilege against the image and likeness of God. To Agee and other defenders of human divinity, Ford's new Messiah was a mechanized complex of idols to the enchantments of Mammon. And that wraps up section 5. And I have to tell you, real strong power move by McCarraher. It's that joke we made on this old Foucault episode that every movie you should have to say the title of the movie in the movie. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think this is kind of that for me. It's like real power move, ending the chapter with the title of the very book the chapter is in.
Mm. Yeah, it's really similar to that one scene when Luke Skywalker's like, man, things are so crazy with all these Star Wars going on.
Yeah, that exact line. A classic.
What are you guys, like some sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Quick, we have to get out of this Temple of Doom.
I think the whole initial thing that came up in was around No Country for Old Men. And it was like Tommy Lee Jones's line at the end where he's talking to his dad, sitting outside the fire in the dark, telling him it was No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, wait, does he? He doesn't.
No, he doesn't actually say that, but it sounds like he could say that in the dream. Yeah.
Or like in The Road when when the dad's telling the son, like, don't go over there, there's zombies on the road.
A lot of history down that road.
It's like when Mel Gibson's portrayal of William Wallace when he's riding his horse and he's like, we have to have a brave heart.
Or whenever in the Passion of the Christ, speaking of Mel Gibson, when Jesus is on the cross saying, God, I'm really feeling that I'm having the passions of the Christ right now.
Or it's like in Schindler's List.
It's like, hey, we got to save these people. You have that list? What list? The one Schindler gave you. Oh, Schindler's List. Absolutely. Here it is.
Schindler's List.
We're going to take a great trek through the stars. A what? A Star Trek, bro.
It's every day, bro.
You can do this with every single movie.
That's the whole point. That is exactly the point.
Actually, you know what's funny is how much it's true on accident and is not remarkable, like in Dunkirk, because they say the word Dunkirk.
I have to tell you, so our good comrade Max, who did our Stuart Hall episode on policing the crisis, the only thing that I retain in my memory from the film Dunkirk is after Max saw it, he basically would just say, yeah, I just don't understand why everyone just kept saying Dunkirk. So,
he was talking about how he couldn't understand what anybody else said, so it was just like, blah, 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 Dunkirk.
That's all I remember from that film now. It's just Max saying
I got one more, then I'll stop forever.
Do it.
We gotta show these damn Japs that they're walking on a thin red line.
Whoa! Does anyone want to? Do you want to do letters from Iwo Jima and flags for our fathers? I feel like Clint Eastwood would completely put in stupid shit like that in his movie. It's just like, who? Well, I was gonna say Richard Jewell, but that's too easy.
Yeah,
but it was like, does he say Gran Torino in Gran Torino?
Oh yeah, they're talking about because
this car, right?
It's car, yeah.
I
was thinking Mystic River, but they do say, that's also in the movie as well.
Yeah, my daughter was killed right next to the Mystic River.
Yeah, that one's not interesting.
Yeah, that one's not good.
You can cut that one.
Yeah, cut that one out.
But only that one?
Stop anyone from ever doing this again. Get out of here, Chris.
Guys, so many of us have escaped. This really is a great escape.
Did you see whenever he jumped the motorcycle over that fucking fence? It's just a great escape, man.
That was a fucking great escape.
That was an excellent fucking stunt, too.
Yeah.
Isn't that fucking cool? Anyway,
That's
I gotta go,
shit.
guys.
All right, peace out. Get out of here.
Love y'all. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
A little bit of honey